Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alberto Rodriguez, and I'm here with Arizona Attorneys Respond, a new program from the State Bar of Arizona addressing your legal questions, specifically in this current pandemic of COVID-19. We're all practicing safe distancing, which is why we are producing this with a Zoom call. So I want to start off by introducing today's volunteer, and her name is Claudia Lopez. She is an immigration and bankruptcy attorney here in town, and she'll be talking to us about bankruptcy issues, bankruptcy questions, and how to ultimately maybe avoid getting into the bankruptcy. So she'll provide us with some financial tips, and let's give her a big welcome. Claudia, thank you for being here. This has proven to be such a valuable program for the public, and I just want to thank you right at the beginning to make sure that you know that the time you're going to invest in answering these questions is truly valuable. So thank you for being here, Claudia.
Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just for those who are tuning in, the first few questions is that I want Claudia to give you some background on and some tips on how to avoid getting to the bankruptcy. But if you do get to that bankruptcy stage, there's a few different options that you have. So she's going to focus on how to avoid it. But if we got to get there, what are your options? So the first thing, Claudia, is what are some tips that people can do right now to deal with creditors, to deal with maybe a late mortgage payment, maybe a late car payment? What are your suggestions for these folks?
Be proactive. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed to reach out and ask for help. So if you owe money to a mortgage company or a card company, a credit card company, whoever it may be, reach out. Right now, they have programs for the most part to help people due to the situation of this pandemic. So if you call, for example, Wells Fargo and ask for assistance with your mortgage, you don't even have to go into much detail. Just say, I know there's a program for Corona or COVID-19. Can you please consider me for this? And if it's a mortgage, for example, they have the ability to defer payments for up to 90 days. Just make sure that you ask what will happen at the end of that 3-month, 90-day period. Will I have to pay all those 3 months of mortgage payments at once? Or will I be able to make payments on that? Or will you put it on the back of my loan? Those are important questions to ask before you agree to receive their assistance. You don't want to end up in a situation where you kind of push out the inevitable. So just be prepared. That's the second step. Be proactive is the first, be prepared is the second. Same deal for your car. If you're falling behind on your car payment, reach out to Toyota or GM or whoever it may be and ask for assistance with due to the situation. They also have programs, but again, ask those questions. What will happen at the end of whatever plan period they give you? Will there be interest that continues to accrue? Do I have to make like a lump sum payment of some sort at the end? Or will you simply extend the term of my loan? Credit card companies, you, again, can contact them and say, can you please consider me for this program? Can you tell me what happens to the interest? Will you be able to waive any interest during this period? There is nothing easier than just picking up the phone and contacting them and asking these questions. Another important question you want to ask is, what about my credit report? If I participate in your program, will you be reporting this as a late instance, or will it be reported as if I am still current? And those are all legitimate questions, and these companies have answers for you.
That's great advice. I know that when I log into my Wells Fargo app, there's a little banner right across the top. It says, are you being impacted by COVID-19? Click here. Let's see what we can do to help you. So I know that's Wells Fargo specific, but like you said, all it takes is a phone call to your creditor to see what options they have, if any. So great tips on trying to manage all that debt. So we'll go ahead and talk about the differences. If they're not able to resolve that with the creditors or the debtors, If they perhaps were experiencing some hardships prior to COVID-19 and this just was the icing on the cake, they might have been furloughed, they might have lost hours, they might have lost their jobs overall. I think that it just added another layer of hardship on these folks. So if bankruptcy is an option, what are those options? Because I know there's 3 different types. So let's talk about those.
Sure. So there's a Chapter 7, a Chapter 13, and a Chapter 11. What most people typically think of as bankruptcy is probably called Chapter 7, and that's liquidation. That's where this is what I have, this is what I owe. You present it to the bankruptcy court, takes a few months, and your debt is wiped out with some exceptions that we'll talk about later. Now, Chapter 13 is very different. That is a reorganization. That is for someone who perhaps has a home, has fallen behind on mortgage payments, and they're trying to keep that home. So Chapter 13 would be an avenue to do that. Or perhaps you have a car, a vehicle, and you're behind on payments on that, and you're trying to keep that car and stop it from being repossessed. Chapter 13 could be a tool that could help you accomplish that as well. It's a payment plan over 3 to 5 years. It's almost like debt consolidation, except you have the protection of the bankruptcy court while you're dealing with all these arrangements. Chapter 11 is very similar. However, that is reorganization really geared at someone who perhaps has a small business, right? So you're being affected by COVID-19. Chapter 11 might be an option. Those are Chapter 11 is what we sometimes see with big companies, and it's restructuring, reorganizing again. But it's typically not for consumers. It's mostly geared at individuals who have too much debt that don't qualify for 7s or 13s.
Gotcha. So, and you touched on debt consolidation, which we will circle back on because there's some pros and cons to that. So we'll talk about those in a bit. Claudia, what are your thoughts on those items that are exempt, or those items or that debt that is unforgivable? I know there's a few, and there's a specific question that I'm going to ask you, but if people owe back taxes or if they're behind on child support, would a bankruptcy help in those cases?
So for the most part, debt that is unforgivable is called non-dischargeable debt within the bankruptcy. So different chapters have different limitations, but in Chapter 7, for example, back child support would not be forgiven. Also, if you owe back taxes, they may not be forgiven. There are some exceptions depending on how old the taxes are, how much time has elapsed from when those taxes were assessed or owed to the present time, whether you actually had to do any amendments. It gets very technical, but the general answer is no, they're not dischargeable except in some very specific circumstances. Student loans would be another example. Typically, they're not dischargeable except in very limited circumstances, and to do that, you have to obtain what's called a hardship discharge.
Excellent. And you touched on something very important, which leads me to my next question. You said it depends on the technicality, right, of your case. So my next question is, do you need an attorney to help you file bankruptcy? Because all of the documentation is available online. But in my case, I consider myself to be a pretty smart guy, but I don't know if I'd be able to answer the questions if I needed to. So what are your thoughts on, do I need an attorney or do I not need an attorney to help me file for bankruptcy?
So I think what you don't know, you don't know. So you wouldn't know to look for those technicalities. And that's where something very simple can become very complex. So there are some cases that perhaps are very straightforward. Maybe somebody who is single, has been in Arizona for many, many years, if not most of their life, has just debt, maybe has an apartment, so they don't have any real assets or any assets that they could be in jeopardy of losing to some degree. And they don't have any other like big savings, etc. Perhaps that could be a situation where they could go to like the self-help center or something along those lines. However, even then, it would probably be in your best interest to consult with an attorney and make sure that that is the actual case. and that way they can look over it and make sure that everything is squared away. If you moved to Arizona 3 days ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago, different rules might apply to you that could impact your ability to keep assets or to have some of the debt go away. So you want to make sure you consult with an attorney to make sure that you are applying the correct law for protecting assets, which is called exemptions, and also to make sure that you're filing within certain time periods that impact whether your taxes could be forgiven, etc.
Gotcha. So most people know that bankruptcy is under federal law, but there are state level nuances that could affect your case. So definitely it is really important for you to either educate yourself or, like you said, consult with an attorney at the initial stage if you want to tackle your bankruptcy on your own. Otherwise, hire an attorney to get you through it. Okay.
Yes, completely agree.
Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to ask you some questions. They're a little bit more broad in their capacity. We're going to do 2 videos today. We're going to do, the first one will be just kind of the broader questions. And then the second one will be for folks that ask very specific questions. That'll allow those who just were interested in kind of learning more about bankruptcy to stick with the first video. And then the other consumers that we want to make sure we're addressing, they'll be included in the second video. So stand by, you asked your question. Don't think we forgot about you. It's on the next video. And if you just want some general information, keep listening to Claudia and myself. Okay? So first question is, if I owe back taxes, will I still get a stimulus check? So obviously everybody's getting that $1,200 stimulus check. What are the chances of it being garnished because I owe back taxes, or me not receiving it because I owe back taxes and the IRS is the one that's facilitating the payment? And another example would be if I owe back child support, if I'm in arrears, is that going to affect my stimulus check?
So the guidance that I saw as to the first part of the question, if you owe back taxes, will you be able to receive this money? The answer would be yes. According to the guidance that I've seen, you would be able to get it. There is no impediment because you owe back taxes. Typically, if you owe back taxes and you do a refund, the IRS would keep it and apply that money to the refund to your account. However, there's a caveat, and the caveat is if you are in bankruptcy, please make sure you contact your trustee or your attorney to make sure you can keep this money, because some bankruptcies have a requirement that you turn over tax refund, which this is not, or other property that are received during that bankruptcy case. So you want to make sure that you're in full compliance with your duties to the court, to the trustee, to etc., so you can get your discharge. So just make sure you follow up on that. Regarding the child support, unfortunately, I couldn't answer that because I didn't see any guidance about that. But as far as the back taxes, yes, you would be able to get it. Now, there's another element to that. Let's assume that you are going to be filing bankruptcy in the near future and you are waiting for this check to come. Make sure you consult with an attorney about the timing of your filing of the bankruptcy so that you can get the benefit of that amount versus filing the bankruptcy and becoming perhaps part of what's called your bankruptcy estate, which is your assets, and it perhaps impacting that case to some degree. So if you're looking at filing for bankruptcy and you haven't filed yet, once you get that money, you do end up spending it, spend it on things that are necessary for your household. So maybe pay your rent for 1 month or pay your electricity, buy some groceries, keep receipts, make sure you can track this so that way you don't have any issues.
The essentials, right? Especially during this time.
Essentials.
Purchase the essentials. Don't go and buy a TV. Let's not do that, guys.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people have been furloughed. They've lost their jobs, and they have questions pertaining to that, specifically with unemployment. If they've been approved for unemployment, but they still owe some debt and they're being collected on, will unemployment be impacted?
So that's a very interesting question. That's where we talk about items that are exempt. So in Arizona, some funds are exempt from process. That means someone can come into your bank account if they already sued you and they have an order to take money away, a garnishment. For example, Social Security income is typically non-exempt, and unemployment in Arizona is also unexempt, only if you actually are able to set it up in its own account, meaning no commingling. Because if I'm a creditor, which I'm not, but if I was to be one, and I see money sitting in an account that you've had for some time, and maybe you're getting money in there from wages, right? You used to have a job, or maybe a family member gave you some money, you put it in there. Maybe you had a car accident and you got a payout from that, and it's in that account. And now unemployment comes in, that's commingling. You can't be mixing these monies together. So if you want to protect that unemployment to some degree, you need to make sure you're not commingling that amount. How do you do that? You set up its own account, and you ask the Arizona Department of Unemployment to go ahead and deposit it into that specific account. And again, this is only for Arizona. So if you are just moved here, there may be different rules that apply to you, check with an attorney, but under Arizona law, unemployment is exempt. There are some exceptions to that, so consult with an attorney, but if you're not commingling, you should be fine for the most part.
Gotcha. So for those folks that asked about if their unemployment would be impacted or garnished perhaps from a creditor, your homework assignment is to get a separate account set up. Get that account set up and ask the state to deposit your unemployment check there. No commingling.
And only that. So don't start depositing other money into that account after the fact. It has to be its own special little account.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So that's a great tip. And I'm sure that a few folks are going to take advantage of that tip and call the bank right away and say, set me up.
Good.
Next question, Claudia, is I lost my job last month and I have not been able to make my credit card payments. So this is the topic that we're talking about. I asked for a grace period, so they've actually called, like you suggested, called asking for different options. They basically told me that's too bad and that my contract said that I needed to pay the full amount. What do I do?
So once you contact your credit card company, or whoever the creditor is, and they're not willing to work with you, then start looking at bankruptcy as an option. Sometimes I think people get scared of the word bankruptcy. There is really no emotional involvement with the bankruptcy process. It's really looking at, what do you have? What do you owe? Can you make those payments on that obligation? And if you can't, then you look at bankruptcy as a way to give you some peace of mind, as a way to give you that fresh start, as a way to really deal with the situation that, like in this instance, it's out of your control. And I should really highlight that when you file for bankruptcy, there is nothing on that paperwork where you have to indicate the reason why you're filing. No one's going to ask, did you lose your job, or was it because of medical, or whatever the reason may be. It really comes down to, okay, so let's see your income, let's see your expenses, let's see your liabilities, and let's see your assets. It's really just a numbers game at that point. So if you are in this situation where it's kind of like a last-ditch resort, you try to ask for help, they're not willing to help you, look at bankruptcy. It's really not the end of the world.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something about emotional. I alluded to this in the beginning of our discussion. There's some folks that use this, and I'm generalizing, so I'm not pointing any fingers, but sometimes people use this as kind of like an easy way out. But there's other people that this really takes an emotional toll on. They're that credit score watcher. They're the ones that make their payments on time. They're the ones that, are proud that they're, that upstanding citizen and I don't have any debt. But emergencies arise where, sometimes medical issues arise, loss of job, currently with the furloughing. But bankruptcy, it has that connotation of negativity. But I believe that if you were to understand how helpful it can be, there's a time period where it'll affect you and your credit score. But man, it's really going to be helpful in terms of like the stress associated with dealing with debtors and people that are calling you and harassing you and asking for payment. Am I right?
Yes. So there really is a process within the bankruptcy court to weed out those bad apples. It's actually very hard to do that, where you ramp up a whole bunch of debt and then you go present yourself in court and file for bankruptcy. They can investigate you for fraud. That is definitely something that the court can do. There can be criminal prosecutions arising out of that. So that is extremely, extremely rare. Usually the debtors that I've seen are people that end up in situations, whether because they lost employment, they got divorced, they had an illness in the family, a death perhaps, or maybe they got themselves into some accounts or debts that they just didn't understand very well. Maybe they bought a car with really high interest rate and it ended up being a clunker and they ended up, losing the vehicle to some degree. Those are all situations that we encounter. And so the bankruptcy can really help alleviate some of that stress and bring you some actual relief. Now, the credit report is very interesting because every time you're late, they're reporting that to the credit bureau. The bankruptcy is one hit. It's not consistent late activity and late payments that are going to continue to drag you down. This is a one-time deal and you're starting afresh.
That is a great point. That is a great point because you're right. Every late payment's a hit. And if you just kind of get wrap your hands around this issue, you can, accomplish a lot with the bankruptcy. That's a great point. I didn't think of that. And not that I need to think of every point, but that was a good one, Claudia.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing. And one last question before we start to wrap up. This one is for somebody that's already in the bankruptcy process. So check this out. I filed for bankruptcy. A week ago, my case was dismissed because I didn't show up to court. So, oops. Will I be able to refile right away, or is there a waiting period? Also, I just received my stimulus check and my tax return. Will I have to turn those in if I file for bankruptcy again?
So that's a very interesting situation. If it was my client, what I would suggest is I would see if that other case, the older case, can be salvaged. If it was just dismissed a week ago, there is a way to maybe get it back on track. Reach out to the court, reach out to the clerk, go to the self-help center and say, hey, I missed my meeting. Can I get my case reinstated? Maybe you file a motion to reinstate and get the case back alive. The reason being, if you can't do that, you might be subject to, there's a waiting period sometimes, not all the time, of 6 months. If a case gets dismissed for cause, meaning that you failed to do something you were ordered to do. And that's to prevent the situation of these bad apples where they file a case, they run to court, they don't follow through, and they keep filing these cases. So you want to avoid that. So reach out to a self-help center or to your attorney. Ask if you can get this case reinstated. If you get the case reinstated, then you have to look at the filing date, the original filing date, and either with an attorney or the self-help center figure out whether the stimulus money was announced before you filed or after you filed. Because if it was announced after you filed, you have an argument that that is something perhaps that you can keep, depending on your trustee's position. So again, this is something that a conversation needs to be had with the trustee or the self-help center or your attorney. I would really recommend trying to get that case back online, the older one, because that's probably to your best benefit.
Right. And I guess that brings me back to the point of, yes, we can do this by ourselves, right? We can download the forms, we can fill it out, but there are nuances, and that's what you pay an attorney. You're paying them for their service. You're paying for them to keep you on top of appointments, your hearings. They're the ones that know if courts are open, especially with COVID-19. They're
Right.
the ones they're keeping track of that. So while, yes, we're fully capable, and if you want to do that, by all means, you can file on your own. But an attorney really does put their heart and soul into their practice. They continue to take courses throughout the year, and this is what they do for a living. So they don't want to compromise that. They don't want to compromise your case. So definitely something to look into when dealing with bankruptcy because of these little technicalities.
And something else that's very important, Alberto, is that unlike a document preparer, we have a duty to our clients, right? So we have a duty to look out for their best interests. We have a duty to advise you. We have a duty to let you know how something will impact you either positively or adversely, and to kind of look at other scenarios for you. If you just download forms, go to a document preparer, that document preparer doesn't have the same duty. So they're just filling out forms, and they also can't give you legal advice. So even if they have some experience and they see, oh, that looks kind of weird, it's not the same thing. So it really gives you peace of mind, I think, when you have an attorney doing the worrying for you.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Because lawyers, if you guys didn't know this, the State Bar of Arizona, we regulate attorneys, and there's ethical standards and rules that attorneys have to comply with to make sure that the license stays compliant. As Claudia mentioned, document preparers aren't held to that same standard, and you're not held to that same standard. So if you make a mistake, you're going to have to own that. If your attorney, who I hope won't make a mistake, is going to have to deal with that. So that's one of the issues with hiring an attorney. Real quickly, Claudia, that's the last question that we received that are more of the broader spectrum. We do want to remind folks that we will be having the Arizona attorneys respond next Monday, and we'll be addressing their family law issues, so stay tuned for that. We want to remind people that the State Bar of Arizona does have the Find a Lawyer platform. That's an online platform where you can go and give us a brief summary of your legal statement or of your legal issue, and attorneys can hopefully help you. So that's a great resource. And then we want to thank our partners at the Arizona Foundation for Legal Services and Education, who also helped field these questions for us. So there's quite a few people that we have to thank. I think Claudia might have experienced some technical difficulties because she's not on the call any longer. But again, I want to thank you. I want to thank our social media followers for asking these questions. These are really important, and I know that the information that Claudia provided you is going to help you. We have the Find a Lawyer tool on our website, so visit azbar.org to get more information on that. And again, I want to thank everyone for making Arizona Attorneys Respond such a successful program. This is our fourth legal topic that we're addressing, and we look forward to providing you with so much more information in the coming weeks. So thank you so much. Continue to ask us your legal questions, and we'll be chatting soon. Thanks a lot.